here, I think value should be X, and that's how we're going to underwrite this file. But changes have happened, and now, we don't hold appraisal licenses or appraisal certifications, and both HUD and Fannie and Freddie have said, if you do not hold an appraisal certification or an appraiser license, you cannot determine the value. You must have someone who is licensed support the value. So there are times when, I really think value is questionable, and I think possibly an investor would question me on it. I don't have the liberty of just saying, we're going to go with 250 and that's that. I have to get support from a licensed appraiser in order to make that value determination. That's why I have to go out for a field review or a desk review or someone that will determine, I have a license and I think value is this, and I may end up having to use that to make my value determination instead of the original appraisal if we really feel like there is a situation out there that we don't think value might be supported on the secondary market.
Well, along that line about why, one of the things Larry said was that the four gentlemen sitting up here and I, and anybody who works with these people, also, they've been approved, so they know the area. When you send it out to a third party that has no connection at all, and just, like I've had desk reviews come back on my appraisals from Texas, and basically a desk review is supposed to be a technical look, that I do things technically correct. But they come back, they're asked to give a value. Well, in the city of Philadelphia, as we all know, so that if we don't have to get to that level, we take that out of the equation. And that's why when you go to the field reviews and the desk reviews, a lot of them are done by these huge companies. One of them is called Lansing, a proper name, and they're called borrowers. They could come back. I had one just recently, just to give you an idea, they used comparables that anybody in this room would have said, what did they do? And the guy was from Doylestown. But, I live in Bucks County. It doesn't matter where you're from. It matters where you know how to do your work. Craig and I both live 20 minutes from each other, from Larry. And but that doesn't, our expertise is in the city and where we've done work. But you're not always going to get that. So if you can prevent that by giving the, comparables.
Right, and we want to do it. I think Atlantic Safe is owned by Bank of America, who bought Countrywide, who started a lot of these problems. But
Larry, I don't know if it's important. This might be a part of the point, but the idea of second appraisals. That sometimes, in the past, where if the property didn't appraise, and they would go back to the lender and say, well, we'll just order a second appraisal. That's not. You can't do that.
Right, and we're not doing that. So, and we won't do that, right?
Well, for Fannie Mae, if I get two appraisals, I have to take the lower of the two.
Right, so it doesn't pay to do it. Okay, but let me continue. So a lot of you were great, and you emailed us a lot of questions, and Kevin's going to start with the questioning about comps and how comps can be, and square footage of balconies and basements, kitchens in the basement, and everything that you want to hear when you value your properties for listings. But before we start, does anyone have a question that we can have Bob or somebody else answer before we start the list of questions that were emailed to us? Linda?
What about a condo building where there have been no sales in the past year and a half? Now, we have at least 2 or 3 listings there, and hopefully they're going to sell soon. Where are the comps coming from? We have to go to other buildings, obviously. But a developer actually told me one comp must come from the building. Is that correct?
Okay, Bob?
Linda, if there's no sales, settled sales in the subject building, then you have to go outside the building. If you only had a listing inside the building, you would put that in as a supporting, like a 4th or 5th comp. But only as a guide, as a supporting comp. You can't base your value on that. You only base your value on settled sales, either inside or outside the building. So you have no choice if there's no settled sales in the past 12 months, right? But to go outside the building. So it's comparability, right? So we're looking at location, size, condition, right? So you want to stay within whatever the radius of that subject property is. and compare it on size, condition, upgrade, so forth. And then that's all we can do.
So Bob, that developer got their price somewhere, right? So what did they do? They were going to try to do the same thing these guys did, right? You know, they're developing that number from close by similar condos in that area, and these guys are going to try to do the same thing and document it.
Travis?
Well, can you give us a general range or percentage of properties that aren't appraising? You know, just so we have a reference point of what are we talking about, 10%?
I mean, Irene would see that more than we would.
It depends on if we're in a refi market or not. Actually, the refi market has a lot to do with where borrowers just overestimate what their properties are worth, because we have hit a declining market in the area, and unfortunately sometimes bought the property
Right.
3 years ago and it's not appraising out now. Taking the
purchase
refis
side,
out of it,
yeah.
on the purchase side, I say 10%. And we start, not that we don't question more than 10%, but where we really start having a value battle, maybe on 10% of the purchase
Right.
business.
And I'm seeing less and less in the city. When I get the phone calls, it's usually one of you calling me up and saying, hey, so-and-so from X mortgage company was sent out, and they sent an appraiser and they appraised this. You know, can you maybe take over this transaction? Type situation. Because, you know, we have these four guys who know Center City, and they might have sent somebody, and I've seen it where they've sent people from Lancaster, Mount Pocono, Allentown, you know, and I remember speaking to an appraiser years ago who argued with me that historic was a detriment to the property. You know, and they came from Mount Pocono. You know, I don't know how, that was like 4 hours, I don't even know how far Mount Pocono is, it must be 4 or 5 hours away. Who had no idea that a historic property on Pine Street is worth more because of the status. Jody?
What, how much bearing does it have on an appraisal if you're comparing to a property that was an estate or a short sale?
Okay, we're gonna get it. I think, Kevin, you have that question about short sale.
Yeah, we have it, and you guys gave some phenomenal questions. Go ahead.
So Vicky, before Kevin starts.
How far back are we allowed to go for comps now?
Okay, that's the next question. So let's have it started with questions, and then I'll come back into the crowd.
We'll come back after the list of questions. We'll come back to you and see if we get some more of your questions. Because what we did was Larry actually took and all of us got a whole bunch of your questions, whittled it down to the ones that covered the most space and covered the most topics and made the most sense, that we thought it was the information that was valid for you people to know. And they were really great questions. So we're going to start with the first one. We're going to throw it to Ed. And it's a kind of a three-part question. It says, number one, how far can you go for a comp? How old can that comp be? And is it the same for condos? Do you use the same set of rules in terms of distance and age?
I'll say yes to the last part of that question. You will have the same evaluation process and trying to determine the marketplace of the subject property. We are required to develop a report. You have to go back 12 months and look at data and compare the data from 7 to 12 months ago of that neighborhood market. The same buyer would look at the properties buying as other houses in the neighborhood. So you have to compare that data from 7 to 12 months ago to data from 4 to 6 months ago. You can break it into 3 different categories in the current 3 months. Then you have to evaluate the trend of the comparable properties from that distance back 7 to 12 months to the current market and see what changes they may have taken place, and bring that across in the appraisal as far as the actual trend of values in the neighborhood. By looking at comps from 12 months ago, it gives you an idea where they were and where you're at today. And if you see similarities in the same pricing of the house, you could go back and justify using those comps if you don't have them currently. But you want to have at least one sale within 3 months within the neighborhood, within a half-mile radius at most, instead of, excuse me? Half mile is really, it just depends, all the neighborhoods get so in and out and change the boundaries. And if you can maybe even use neighborhoods you find that aren't adjacent to one another but yet are similar in value, you can stretch it to a farther point. The data, pending sales are important. I think we talked about this earlier before, because there's such little data now that in order to support your findings for the current market, you have to look at pendings and actives. and we look at them a lot, and we do make the calls on the pendings to verify the actual sale price. So this way we can bracket an older sale from 12 months ago that sold for $275, and we have a pending sale now for $275, but yet we had no sales between those 12 months. That helps us allow to use the sale that's older in time. But if there are sales that are immediately in the neighborhood, adjacent to the property, it'd be hard not to use them. So you would, excuse me? You can go back 7 to 12 months if you want, if you have no other sales. And all we do is just, we comment in the report, we'll run the MLS trend, and it's nice now because you have the mapping with the neighborhood boundaries. You just go in there and map that area out, and you'll run the sales. If there's no data there, you put in your report there are no sales. And I actually spell it out. There are no sales in the last 6 months. Reason for having to use a comp. It was 7 to 12 months old. Provide a pending sale that's supportive in the neighborhood of the same pricing, and it helps justify your findings.
So Ed, you're looking at 7 to 12 months, 4 to 6, 0 to 3, and trying to find that trend between the full 12 months.
We're required in all our evaluations, no matter what the property is, you have to go back and search the market of the data back 12 months ago. You have to bracket 7 to 12 months ago, what happened 4 to 6 months ago, and the current 3 months as far as similar type housing that the buyer is looking at now that he may have looked at then. And you're comparing those markets, those individual entities with each other, and you're drawing a conclusion to, is the market the same? Has it changed? Is it down or up? If your findings are stable, then you can justify using an older comp. But again, you have to provide something pending or an active listing to help be supportive of your findings. Back it up, right? And you just explain in the report. If you spell it out, that there's no sales there, and you can justify, because I keep all the data, I run it, I print it, I Adobe it, I save the file with the folder, and that's my findings. So whatever comes back to me, I always say, this is my data, this is what I looked at, this is the results I had. So the challenges, though, is when you're running the data, we're in the trend, we're doing the condos versus single-family properties. When I run my search, I'm only comparing condos if I'm doing a condo with condos. So the only thing that'll screw it up is if by accident in the MLS they don't put condo, and they have it as a fee simple ownership, so it's going to get out of the search. And if the only reason the only way I would find something like that is if I was desperate to have any sales, I would run it wide open, I would stack it up one step, and just take a chance and look to see if by accident there was one listed or not.
So when they're pricing listings, can you explain the differentiation between FHA and Fannie? Because I know FHA has mandated a little bit closer range in property age.
I don't differentiate at all. I do all my evaluations the same, and if it doesn't fall within their parameters, with my knowledge, I will just explain the rationale to my findings. And you can't, not every appraisal can fit the parameters of all the guidelines. It's just impossible, as far as there's not enough data out there. So you just have to justify your findings, which you did, and support, and then have supportive information and explanations of why you can't do the comps you used. And I'll submit stuff, and they'll come back to me, and they'll ask for something, and I'll just flat out, when I look at it, I'll say it's flat out not there. And they have to cover their side too to say this is what we're required to have. If you don't have it, you just have to explain to them it's not there.
Right, because it's an opinion, and you just need to support your opinion.
Yeah, it's all based on the data. It's really not our opinion. It's the opinion of the data.
Now, what happens when you're looking and there's a short sale or foreclosure that distorts the data for that particular unit or a house, and it's, but there's like 4 other comps that support the value of the agreement of sale. Do you just discount that short sale or foreclosure, or do you mention it in your appraisal?
Another tool in Trend, which is good, they have the option there. You can choose to select or deselect short sales or short sales and foreclosures. They have them in there. And I'll run all my data. Now, I can't look at everything individually, but I'll just check the box for short sales, and it'll bring up the ones that are short sales, and I'll look at them. But that's a whole different marketplace, short sales versus a regular, regular arm's length transaction. So I typically discount them. It depends what type of property you're doing though. If you're doing a property that's in bad condition, fixer-up or TLC, that would be more representative possibly of a short sale because they are under the same stress as far as the condition of the property.
That's a different question.
Okay.
So
Craig, you want to add something?
I think as far as short sales go, you have to look at the neighborhood. if there's a short sale, and it's not typical for the market, you have other sales that are market sales, then you don't need to pay attention to that short sale. It's unusual. However, there are instances where you go into a neighborhood and there are a number of short sales within it wouldn't be Philadelphia, but in a subdivision, for instance. Then you start asking yourself, what is going on in this community where there are so many short sales? And at that point, if there are an abundance of short sales, well, then you have to say to yourself, I think the market is being impacted because of the short sales, and maybe the market has changed because of those short sales, and the value should really be reflective of what those short sales are. Because if you have a number of short sales and only a very few market sales, well, they're going to be brought down by the short sales. More people are going to be looking to get into those neighborhoods using the short sale. So, and just backing up on we were talking about the guidelines. Fannie Mae guidelines are what appraisers use for appraising properties for mortgage-related transactions, federally regulated transactions. So when Ed did an excellent job of explaining the process, there are guidelines that we have to follow, and I know that we're going to touch on a couple of them. Finished area below grade. There are certain things that we are allowed to do, things we are not allowed to do. And there are adjustment percentages that we're supposed to make, or limitations on adjustments on a percentage basis for single line items, gross adjustments. That's what we're referring to. But then when you talk about FHA, really the methodology and the practice of appraising is no different regardless of what the financing is in place. Now, I think the only other difference is that FHA, if I'm correct, the appraisal is only good for a period of 4 months with FHA, which I think with an Fannie Mae it's 6 months. Is that correct?
Larry?
That is correct. There's a one-time 30-day extension. It's going to be applied for an FHA loan before the appraisal expires. So you can get a 30-day extension, or we can get an extension to 180 days as long as we apply for it within the original 120 days, and we haven't already gotten a 30-day extension.
Right. And let me just add one thing on the FHA, especially in the city. Condominiums. Condos have been like a huge thing in the city of Philadelphia. And we have a separate condo department that's available to us to get condominiums approved. And they've done a great job. And I work very closely with them. But people come to me and say, how about trying to get this condominium FHA approved? So, and we will, and we've done it before. But if you're trying to sell a unit in a building that's not FHA approved and have them go FHA, we cannot order that appraisal until we get the FHA approval because we can't get a case number. So some people try to push, well, we need to make sure the value's there, the value's there, the value's there, but we can't get the value because we can't get a number and we don't even know whether the building will get FHA approved. So it might be a deal that's not going anywhere. So in that case, you should just really call, Sean or Jason or Kevin, whoever your mortgage consultant is, and get the time frame, and it's usually going to be looking at 90, 120 days on that agreement, so we have time to get that condo approved, and then we'll know if there's issues probably within 60 days if there's an approval issue.
Laura, is it just the building that needs to be approved, or the entire, of course, I'm talking about Naval Square. Is it
Right,
just the
well,
building,
Naval
or-
Square's in phases, so in that case, each phase would have to get approved.
Phase would have to.
Right, so
And the developer has to participate in that.
everybody needs to participate. I mean, we need to get engineering reports, we need to get the questionnaires, the bylaws, the recorded docs. I mean, we're calling Donna and getting the recorded docs. There's a whole list of documentation that we need to get that approved.
Is there expense to the developer?
We would love to pass off the expense to the developer, right? But at this time, we have not passed off any expense on getting any building approved in the city of Philadelphia. So like the big theme of what we do is we are your business partner, and we're here to help you sell real estate. And if that means getting that building approved, we will do whatever we need to get that building approved.
I have a question regarding immediately in the neighborhood. Can you compare Ridgewell Square to Washington Square? Or how far are you going in the city in the immediate neighborhood?
Well, Ridgewell Square is a unique location. It is the premier location in the center city of Philadelphia. Are there instances where I have gone outside Rittenhouse Square? Yes. The perfect example are some high-end condominiums where there are just very few sales, and you're looking for, you're asking yourself as the appraiser, would the buyer be willing to live in this community with these amenities, just as easily as they would be willing to live on Washington Square? So a perfect example is the Air. It's a very beautiful high-end building. Sales are pretty high, and we have sales in say 10 Rittenhouse, or there was one in 1706 that we were working over. There just aren't that many sales in that price point. And this was a pretty high price point. In those instances, I would go outside, but it's not typical that I would go outside of Rittenhouse Square. Rittenhouse Square is really a very unique little enclave, and I think the values are clearly shown. The values are higher in Rittenhouse Square than anywhere. So we try not to go outside.
And it impacts more with condominiums when you're doing the comparison. With single-family properties, it's not as great of a deciding factor. I think that what you have to do, and you yourself, and what we have to do as appraisers, is determine whether there is a significant difference percentage-wise and be able to enumerate it within the appraisal. Like, everybody knows if you're on the 1800 block at Delancey and there's only so many sales, you may have to go to find a house that's similar square footage on, say, Pine Street. Well, what would the difference be? That's something we have to do, and we have to be able to do it with the data, by analyzing the data. And one of the things is we've been tossing around here is the rules. They're not really, any of them are not really rules.
They're guidelines.
They're called quote-unquote guidelines. And it's convenient for a lender sometimes, and when I say a lender, I don't mean Trident, but for the secondary, we have a sheet of stuff from Chase Bank that was all their guidelines for comparables. Well, if you followed those, none of us up here could do an appraisal in Center City because it just wouldn't work. But the thing is, what they'll say to you, and it's always down below, is, well, you have to write something about it. We get a lot of questions, well, if you can't find a comparable, or you can't, you have to use something outside of 6 months, tell us why. And that's basically, our job is to explain why we had to do it. And like Ed said, we've done all the data analysis, so we have to explain it. Sometimes it's in the report, and I've many times been asked, where is that question? And it's there. So we try to cover everything, but as a realtor, think about that too. Like, and it's easy to do analysis and trends. You could actually figure out, like, well, houses on this block sell for typically 10% more than they do on another block. It's just, basic statistics.
Right.
Or to make it easier, you can call one of us. And just
Right, yeah.
You say, no, seriously, you can call any of us and say, I have this property I'm thinking about taking the listing for. Or,
Right, we'll get to that at the end, because I don't want to open that out.
No, I'm sorry.
So Kevin's going to use one of the email questions that we got.
Okay, this one's for Bob. Bob, how do you value a property in a fringe neighborhood that could gain value rapidly because of high demand or high traffic?
I think you just,
So Old City wasn't, or in Fishtown now. I mean, there's more homes going up in Fishtown, and developments are going in Fishtown right now, but there's probably sections where the sales are much lower than the renovated properties. How do you deal with that?
I think like any location, you have to compare subject to homes within that radius. So it's got to be another gentrifying location, but it should be the immediate location. I think it's like any other property that you appraise. You're going to compare it, you're going to stay within the radius of that property. And if it's gentrifying, the comparables should also, if they're in their immediate radius, should also be gentrifying, therefore reflective of the subject value. So we're looking at that point in time. We're not looking at the future. We can't look into the future. We can only see what's reflective now.
Right, so it doesn't matter in the sense that Fishtown is an up-and-coming neighborhood, the sales should support that. But if someone's selling a property that's $10,000 higher than the last sale, Geneva?
I just wanted to say, I think some of you might be having difficulty hearing.
We're having a lot of difficulty.
Okay, sorry about
So
that.
it might be good to use the mics.
Bob, hold the mic close.
Yeah.
There was a time in the past, there was a time in the past when we made location, time adjustments. You know, if, maybe in the, 2004 period, you could have made a time adjustment, if it was warranted. But that's not the way it is now.
Back in the day, multiple offers.
Yeah, it's a different period.
Okay. Craig, why don't you handle the next one? How does an appraiser apply the following scenario when valuing one property to the other? You've got, I'll give you the scenario, you have a side-by-side historic properties, two properties with similar footprint and profile. Property number 1 was renovated 15 years ago and it's been nicely maintained. Property 2 was recently renovated in an ultra-fine product fit, finish, granite, stainless, the whole 9 yards. And it has and it has a 10-year tax abatement. How do you look at the two of them?
Are these both on the market right now?
Both on the market.
Okay, both on the market. So I'm not, there are a lot of different factors that go into the valuation. Square footage, obviously, an important part of it, location is important. I'm looking at properties, these two properties, while they're next to each other, they are in different condition. So I'm looking for properties with each one that is a true comparable, properties that have been renovated. And throughout the city, that's not a difficult thing to find. We can find those old historic properties that have been renovated. So we want to determine what the impact on market value is of that renovation to the property that is not quite been renovated. And we can look at historic data if there's a lack of sales. We can say that in the prior period, that homes of similar quality were selling for 10% higher than homes that had not been renovated. And we try and draw a line to see if that still holds true today. And you're just trying to find properties that have also been similarly renovated. That's the key point. A property that has not been renovated to the same degree is going to be adjusted. It's going to be valued at a lower rate. You can use a cost based on a cost basis. You can use a Marshall Swift cost analysis. And there are different approaches to value. We're most familiar with the market approach, where we're using sales comparisons, but we can do a cost approach. We can figure out what the property would cost to build or to renovate, and determine the value based on that. So there's supporting data. It's not we're in a situation like that. We can't rely on the second approach to value.
How often do you use the cost approach?
It's more relevant for new construction, I'll tell you that. It's not as relevant for...
Well, tax-abated property is essentially new construction.
No, there's depreciation. So
I mean, there is wear and tear.
Yeah, there's depreciation. It is different. If you have a property that is newly constructed, we have accurate data. What it costs to build that property today? Okay. When you're doing a cost approach, you're doing what's known as a replacement value. What it would cost to build that property by today's standards? Well, if you have an old property that has a lot of marble and finishes that maybe you necessarily aren't going to see so much today, it may not be cost effective to build that property in the same quality because it's going to price it out of the market.
I just wanted to expand on the tax abatement. Does it itself have any value in the sense that the taxes do not go up for 10 years? On the improved part?
I think it goes more towards marketability. I think it's more of a marketability issue. The property that has a 10-year tax abatement may be slightly more marketable than a home that does not have the abatement because it's slightly more affordable. Trying to quantify that and equate that to value, I find difficult to do. But I think from a marketing standpoint, it's going to sell faster potentially because of the decreased current costs.
So the only value it has in terms of appraised value is its condition comparable to others.
Are we talking about the original question, or are we
talking about a tax abatement property?
Well, there's a lot of factors. We're talking about condition, we're talking about age, we're talking about location, we're talking about amenities, size. Again, there's a lot of different factors, but I think if you're keen on the tax abatement issue, I just think from a marketability standpoint, it's gonna sell faster and maybe it'll slide down the price. But I find it hard to quantify that.
What we try to do is use comparable sales, but they also have similar tax abatements. So you're not comparing a property that has fully taxed $2,000 or $3,000 a year versus a property that's, has a tax rate for 10 years. You really can't even begin to quantitate as far as it has 5 years left, 2 years left, or 10 years left. You don't know what's going to happen until that actually expires, and how the market's going to react to it. So it's just
There's certain features that are hard to adjust for. That's one. Greenhouse, that's not.
Let's go into greenhousing, because there was a couple